a state where neither of these things matter as much. Which is what, surprisingly, a lot of my friends are finding out in their industries. They're like, hey, I've been on this process, I don't really see the business impact. That is because the production function analysis didn't really go into the planning of what they were trying to do. And so they start questioning the process. There's a lot of hype around a lot of processes. Like we want to know, do these things really have the impact that that we're actually reading about them or implementing them? So it's just a factor augmenting thing. So there's also a shock. There's a shock factor for every technology in the economy. So the best way to understand these shock factors is going back to all the technologies that have kind of like disrupted the industries and see what kind of an impact they've had on the economies. And like any other economics argument, you've got the macro picture and the micro picture, right? Automobiles, to computers, and what I'd like to speculate, the fifth or the sixth industrial revolutions to be interplanetary travel or cyborgs and all that kind of stuff. There has been a massive surge in wages of employees, and something very critical that the countries want to understand, that is the contribution of the labor force to the output of the economy has radically improved. But with automation or robots, that's surprisingly not the case. The share of the labor demand or the labor output to the national economies would fall. So it's very important for us to understand the difference there between innovation, radical and incremental. So what we've seen back in the day was radical innovation. I'd like to believe the robot, the Honda Simo that you see on the screen playing a soccer match with Barack Obama, or even Sophia, the robot that's going around all these conferences right now, is the radical innovation we're talking about. Bots, on the other hand, are more incremental. They came through an evolution of the systems that we've built for ourselves. So it's very critical for us to know what kind of an innovation you're working with, and then come back to the production function. So historically, production functions have dealt with labor as L, but there is a necessity today, and there's still a lot of academia researching on this to understand, should this L now be an integrated L that includes the robots as well as the humans? When I say robots, I'm just saying bots. So if you were planning for your unit in your company, you want to design the right policies, you need to exactly factor out what percentage of the output do you want the robots to contribute to. Because there could be instances where a lot of robots will be really good at their work, and then they go idle after a while. And you do not know what to do with those robots, and you'll only figure that out maybe 16 months into the process. So could you use them effectively? So it essentially puts you in a different realm where you want to understand, what do I do with my bot force, right? So that brings me to the case study for India. What does RPA mean for a labor-intensive country like India? Right? I mean, I understand, I kind of studied these things when I was in school in Europe and North America, and I understood why automation was very critical for that. But there's a larger debate around what happens to humans when these things come into the picture. And what would a country like India or even China need to do? So there's larger questions that you need to answer as a company, depending on where you are. So if you were to look at some of the industries, again, I'm no expert on all the industries, and some of the most critical things to understand is the production function changes for every industry. So what applies to me may not apply to you. So it's very important for you to figure out what your own functions are. And if some of you were hoping I'll give you a generic function that you could go back and plug into your systems and get the results, unfortunately I don't have that super function. So you'd have to work yourself through the data that you get, feed it back into the function to understand if it's going to give you the right returns. It's also very critical to understand where you want to be in the value chain, because I see a lot of confusion today on, am I a user? Do I want to be a user? Do I want to be a developer of the bot? Am I basically a solutions person? And a hybrid combination of these things. So it's critical to understand these things, because that's going to impact the economies of scale in the future. Because a lot of discussions, if you're not an early adopter, or if you are an early adopter, halfway through the curve, you'd want to ask these questions around, am I really getting the benefits of this process? Or is it really yielding the kind of results I'm looking at? So that would vary depending on where you are in this value chain. And also understand how different outputs would change for different industries applying the functions that you have. And then we have something called the coefficient of repeatability, obvious as the name suggests. A lot of times we tend to overestimate the number of processes that we have that would stay that way. Given the rate of change that we have in the legacy systems of the companies, the coefficient of repeatability keeps changing. A good example would be, you may not be using emails in a future state, right? I mean, most of the generic emails that you get in the morning that you need a response to saying, thank you for this email, may not exist anymore. You might have a bot that just does that for you. So if you're factoring in that process today and you want to apply something for a future state 18 months down the line, it may not be relevant. So given all these things, what do we really want to do? Like, how do organizations embrace for building bot-based assets? Now, the first thing obviously is getting your production function right. So once you get the factors of A's and B's and your capital and labor, I'm going to tell you what function I use, obviously, so you're going to see what these metrics are. But it's important for industries to know which functions that they need to work with. And it's not so easy because it's from the governments and the labor departments that you get certain functions, because they're the ones who keep a national registry of the entire industry. They collect data on productivity, and you need to go back to, I think in India, it's the Planning Commission's reports to understand how effective is my industry and what am I trying to look at in terms of automation in the future. And of course, reskilling the labor, and that's a very critical part that I do not see much focus on these days, because there is so much effort in actually implementing these things, but within organizations, we do not see as much focus on reskilling the existing labor to be able to operate on these things in a future state. And that would impact you really, really hard, because you might be in a country where the academia is not catching up to the industry, which means there'd be a dearth of labor. So that will put you in a negative shock, again, related to production functions, and that's not a good state to be in, where you're kind of like chasing a relatively tiny substrata of talent. And then work on counterbalancing innovations. A lot of times it's important for people to come up with different ways in which you could manage, like robot health checker, robot taxing, or taxation specialist, or anything to do with these things is very critical. The maintenance part of it is something where the focus should go, because whether we like it or not, a lot of these functions are not going to be in our day-to-day work moving forward. So, looking at the micro picture, preparing for RPA, it's very important, again, as I said, it's going to be broken down for major concepts. Get your function right. There's a lot of literature out there in economics to tell you what kind of function that you could work with. There's a great chance that you will not end up with the right function on the first trial. You need to do a lot of iterations before you hit the right function. Understanding the investment landscape, because it's not going to be the same for everybody. Again, the investment landscape for someone in Europe, in Italy, I remember I visited the Ferrari Museum a long time ago when I was there. The amount of automation they wanted to bring into their assembly line was a lot different from someone like a Tata that is trying to get to certain efficiency by building a nano in India. So these are very critical factors. And wages are going to shoot up because the way things are progressing with industry and academia, specifically in India, there's not going to be a good balance of the talent pool that could actually manage these things and the actual work that's available. So that's going to lead to a bit of an imbalance that a company needs to prepare for. And the transformation part, what do you truly want to do? Where is your core? So it is cool to apply RPA, but we are actually looking at a lot of evidence now where RPA has gone into aspects which actually do not impact the core of what the company wants to do. So it's very critical to know that you get those dynamics right. And so concluding remarks would be, it's very important to know the industry function. So I work with the Cobb-Douglas function. Essentially, it gives you a lot of freedom in experimenting with a lot of combinations of capital and labor. So you could change it with as many possibilities as you want. And there's got to be an infinite number of other functions out there that you can use. Again, I come from a very young industry. It's called the internet. You have a lot of issues with privacy, which is why you're not seeing a case study today. So, but all of this is coming from the framework, the empirical framework that we've built on top of what we're working on in the company. And then, if there is going to be a negative shock, how do I prepare for that? The implications of a production function's negative shock could be really strange. And surprisingly, you wouldn't know it until you actually hit it. Like a lot of times it's more like hindsight. You go back and then understand, yeah, it was actually a negative shock. So it's very important to know what track you're on. And then of course, skilled labor, where would you find it? So if you were to do a skill map today in Bangalore, definitely there's a great amount of work going on in terms of building these bots, but managing them requires an equal amount of expertise to put them to better use. And surprisingly, there's not much focus there. And then capital investments, which is a very natural question. And then the last part is where I'd like to focus, policy. Policy is going to determine a lot of things for you. Again, when policies are made, businesses have to follow. Just think of a hypothetical situation where a political party for populism might decide not to allow automation in the companies. I mean, if you're tracking the policy moves of the governments, it's going to render pretty much all of the activity useless. So it's very important for us to track that and understand where we operate. Thankfully, the Indian government has an AI charter. They've started applying AI to their operations in the parliament. They're very tech savvy as of today. They want to ensure that the labor is skilled enough to be able to meet the demand of AI in the future. And most importantly, they want to apply it to local problems. I think one of you had a question around that as to how do you build something homegrown. So municipality of India, I think, could make use of AI. Because we all know, there's a lot of work that needs to be done there. So the application, the local application is going to determine the actual impact of this technology. And then most of you, let's be honest, want to see economies of scale, right? I mean, the discussion is around, I've applied robots for the last 2 years. I want to be able to see the returns. I want the price to go down per unit. So essentially, if you were to apply the Cobb-Douglas function, it will tell you for 1 unit of investment, additional investment, how many additional units of output could I make, right? Ideally, you want to put in 1 more and get 10 units more out of that process. But it, unfortunately, is guided by a number that is kind of relevant to that industry, and that's where we need academia, the industry bodies, and government to come together to build that database to be able to better guide the company in this process. So with that, I'm going to end it here. As I said, I have an argument, so I'll be happy to take questions now.
Everybody talks about reskilling and stuff like that, right? And this Zabi or the RP technology is quite a threat, if I might use that word, to the entire BPO industry as such. It's in its maybe adolescence today, but as it grows, do you foresee a situation where the government steps in and say, these are things which you can do with the board versus not? And I'm sure leaders like Peter must be thinking about it.
Yeah, I think it's an area very close to what I like, lobbying. Heard of NASCOM and people like that. So what they have to do is they have to kind of anticipate these things and work with the government. Because there's a chance that these bodies are already collecting data and they know what kind of a technology might impact what part of the population involved in the sector. So this sector is what we're monitoring at the moment, software, information technology, and internet. And so, yeah, the threat is real in terms of certain aspects. Again, coefficient of repeatability. If I say good morning to you every day and you're saying good morning to me and that's your job, there's a very great chance that that will not be there tomorrow. So the threat is real, and that's where we have to kind of understand the landscape in the next 5 years. And yeah, that way it's very important.
I see a period of vacuum happening, right? Because we're not really growing there in terms of upskilling others. And this growth, to be frank, right, is limited to talking centers. So it's kind of balancing out now, but maybe 5 years down the line, as the absent rights things like upskilling, it's quite easy to see that what do I do with my 10 AP processors who are looking, they can't go and programmable tomorrow. These are real questions which I kind of face when I go to try to drive these programs at LLB. we say that okay, I'm going to upskill them and they can do something tech savvy, but practically I find a lot of resistance coming when I'm trying to do that.
Yeah, I think some players are now starting their own academies. That's really nice of them. So those things are open to people, a lot more accessible than the traditional university, where you'd have to go prepare for exams, and it's very intense to get through a 4-year course. So now it's all out there on the internet. So you could just go grab the modules and get certified and get cracking on those tools. And then the tools are only going to get a lot more easier as we move along. There's going to be a lot less coding, so it's mostly going to be plug and play, as Peter mentioned during the keynote. So it's going to be easy for us to train ourselves because it's happening everywhere, like cord cutting in the video business. So in education, it's no longer going to be the university gateway. You could just study on your mobile phones and skill yourself. So I think that accessibility is very critical, and I think people in India now have access to that kind of education. So that's how reskilling is going to fit into this piece.
So I have a little more positive outlook now. I think we should go back and see when ERPs came into India, right? So that time also there were a lot of doomsday predictions. This is like 20 years back, 25 years back when I just started my career. And nothing much happened, right? People adjusted, economy expanded. So the only people who were really impacted were people who were resistant to change, right? And if I see today also now, well, this is a very excellent presentation because I think you're giving a theoretical grounding to the whole discussion. But the way I've seen bots being used, productivity increase is probably just 25% of it. Where I see them more useful in my context, and I work for G. G is a very large and very complex organization, is compliances, audit trails, right? Civil chair activities where you already have heavy tech investments and you cannot do more. If you see the healthcare industry, with a bunch of their own set of compliances, if you want to go and change something on the back end, you need 50 approvals. From the front end, you need 0 approvals, right? So those are the areas where I see RPA actually benefiting more rather than productivity increase. Because in spite of a lot of tech investments, a lot of ERPs and all that stuff we have today, there are still so many places where the ball can get dropped between the plethora of systems. GE today, any ERP, and GE has got hundreds of ERPs, SAP, Oracle instances. Any ERP talks to 50, 60 different applications, right? And these are not all very nicely integrated. There are gaps, and that is the area where we are finding this very useful. More than the actual reduction of people doing the AP function or the AR function. What is also happening is, yes, there's some reduction because the RPA coming in. Those people are now looking at things which they probably didn't have time to look into, right? More strategic planning, So threat is there, but I think some amount of whatever noise is created by media that a lot of job losses will happen. I don't think it will. People will figure out what to do. And there's also good news. Recently, some 200 US companies decided to move shop to India from China. Right? So I think some of these opportunities are coming.
Yeah, I'd like to concur.
I just point to say what I was talking of was on a much larger scale. If you really see macroeconomics, which he's talking about, most of our labor force comes out of internal migration, right? How are we equipping our people from the villages? Do we educate them? What you are talking about is kind of very much at the operational level. What I was talking about is basically, are we as a country enabling that kind of an education and growth?
You're talking more about the social aspect.
Yes, right. So because most of your force, right, is today coming from internal migration. Right? So how much of that do we have? So that's the vacuum I was talking about.
No, so I think if you look at the social side of it, yes, there is a problem, and I think what is also happening. Sorry to take this off the track, but just for a half a minute. In India today, we have an aspirational mass. There is also a mass which is being left out, right? Left behind in the race. So people like us have got benefited by the economic expansion. There are people who, obviously mostly the poorer lot, who are still stuck, right? And I think that's the set, probably also what you're talking about, right? That you will suddenly see that gap increasing, and I think maybe economics can look at that in a more theoretical way.
policies could get driven because ultimately votes come from there.
Yeah. Yes, I think we're in a favorable environment as
Sorry, just one point. If you look at the late 70s and early 80s, the computer was a big thing in India. Right? There's a resistance from the trade union. We don't need to get into computers. And the presence of some of the socialist states, there's a huge presence there. 5 to 6 states, they said, okay, we want to get the computers to India. But just imagine the world 20 years later, and computers created so many jobs within this country. If we not adopted, if we not changed the policies, we would have turned like Cuba and North Korea, right? Doing stuff. We are not adopted the technology. We are far behind compared to the rest of the world. So
So people will adapt, I think we'll move forward. But the fact remains that in spite of doing development, governments can do election if there's a bad monsoon, right? So that fact is there.
but yeah, I just wanted to say, do not confuse the computers with the bots, because the radical and incremental innovation comes in the picture. Something as radical would be maybe scanning your brain or parking your brain on the web, and those kinds of things. Musk is working on it, Neuralink, or if you end up landing on Mars, that could lead to aspects you can't foresee. So they're trying to mix this up with process automation, which I think is a very incremental step in the direction of improving enterprises. And that's an excellent point. A lot of legacy systems within the corporations, I think they don't even communicate 20%. That's what we realize, and that's where most of our work goes in, trying to iron out those differences and bring the right governance structures to ensure the data flows seamlessly. But yeah, I'm positive, which is why I'm here. It's not like I'm against the process automation. I'm a proper tech person, so I'll be the first one to be very happy if humans land on Mars. Yeah, through some automation. Thank you.
Thank you.